The steel doors slammed shut behind Tyrell Washington with a sound that echoed through his chest. Like a death sentence, the intake officer, a pale man with dead eyes and a coffee stain on his uniform, didn't look up from his paperwork. He'd seen 1,000 men walk through those doors. Tyrell was just another number to him, another body to process and forget. But Tyrell Washington wasn't just another body. 3 weeks ago, he'd been sitting in a penthouse overlooking downtown, sipping 30-year-old scotch while his empire stretched across 12 states. Now he wore orange, and his wrists bore the red marks of handcuffs that had been on tight during the 6-hour transport from county jail. Washington, Tyrell, inmate number 847,392. The officer's voice was monotone, rehearsed. You'll be housed in C block. Maximum security. You know the drill. Tyrell said nothing. His jaw was set, his dark eyes fixed on the gray concrete wall ahead. He'd learned a long time ago that silence was power. Let them think he was just another thug who got caught. Let them underestimate him. That's when they made mistakes. The processing room smelled like industrial cleaner and sweat. 5 other inmates stood in line behind him, all in various stages of accepting their new reality. One kid, couldn't be more than 22, was crying quietly. Tyrell could hear the soft sounds of someone trying to hold it together and failing. Another man, built like a linebacker with tattoos crawling up his neck, stood with his shoulders back, trying to look tough, trying to survive what was coming. Stripped down, everything off, Tyrell began unbuttoning the county jail jumpsuit they'd given him for transport. His movements were slow, deliberate. In his previous life, he'd worn custom Italian suits that cost more than most people made in a month. He'd had people who dressed him, people who drove him, people who killed for him. Now he was naked in a room with fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects, while a corrections officer, who probably made $40,000 a year, watched him with bored indifference, turn around, bend over, cough. The humiliation was designed to break you. Tyrell knew that. It was the first step in the system's plan to strip away everything that made you human, everything that made you who you were. They wanted you compliant, broken, grateful for the smallest mercy. But you couldn't break what was already forged in fire after the degrading search. They handed him his new uniform. Orange wasn't his color, but he'd make it work. They gave him sheets that felt like sandpaper, a towel that wouldn't absorb water, and a toothbrush so flimsy it could barely clean anything. Everything designed to remind you that you own nothing. You were nothing. You got someone on the outside? The officer asked, finally looking at Tyrell for the first time. Yeah, they putting money on your books. Tyrell almost smiled. Money. These people had no idea. Even locked up, Tyrell Washington had more money than everyone in this prison combined. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, property in Miami, Los Angeles, New York, investments that generated 6 figures a month without him lifting a finger. But none of that mattered in here. Yeah, Tyrell repeated. I got money. The officer nodded, made a note on his clipboard. You'll need it. Commissary's expensive, and everything else is more expensive than that. There it was. The first hint of the real prison economy. The one that ran parallel to the official one. The one where guards supplemented their income by looking the other way. Where cigarettes were currency and favors were traded like stocks on Wall Street. Tyrell had built an empire understanding economies like that. Let's go, Washington. Time to meet your new home. They walked through a series of corridors, each one more depressing than the last. The walls were painted that particular shade of institutional green that seemed designed to drain hope. Every 20 feet, another steel door that had to be buzzed open by someone in a control room Tyrell couldn't see. The cameras were everywhere, black domes in the ceiling that followed their movement with mechanical indifference. The sound hit him first when they entered C block, a wall of noise that never stopped. Men shouting, metal clanging, guards yelling orders, the constant background hum of hundreds of humans hacked into too small a space, with nothing but time and rage. Washington, eyes up here. A new guard, this one younger, maybe 30, with the kind of military posture that screamed former service. His Namatic Red Morrison. He held a clipboard and looked at Tyrell like he was evaluating a threat. You're in C block, upper tier, cell 47. That's about as far from Gen Pop as you can get in max security. Someone downtown must like you, or fear me, Tyrell thought, because that's what this was. They put him as far from the general population as possible because someone, somewhere, knew exactly who Tyrell Washington was and what he was capable of. The walk to his cell felt like a parade. Every inmate they passed stopped what they were doing to watch. Some recognized him. Tyrell could see it in their eyes. The flash of recognition, then fear, then calculation. Word traveled fast in prison, probably faster than on the outside. They knew a king had arrived. Cell 47 was 8 by 10 feet. A metal bunk bed bolted to the wall, a steel toilet with no seat, and a sink that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the prison opened. A small metal desk attached to the wall. A narrow window, 6 inches wide, with bars so thick they blocked most of the light. Your cellmate's at work detail. He'll be back at count. 4 o'clock. Morrison unlocked the cell, pulled the door open with a metallic screech that made Tyrell's teeth hurt. Welcome to Irongate. The door slammed shut, and just like that, Tyrell Washington was alone in a cage. He stood in the center of the cell for a long moment, taking it in. This was his life now. At least, that's what they wanted him to think. That's what the judge had said when she sentenced him to 25 years. You will die in prison, Mr. Washington, and society will be safer for it. Tyrell finally moved, setting his bedding on the lower bunk. He'd take the bottom, let his cellmate have the top. It was a small thing, but in prison, small things mattered. Respect was earned in inches, not miles. He sat on the edge of the bunk and, for the first time in 3 weeks, allowed himself to think about how he'd gotten here. 3 months earlier, the restaurant was called Aurelio's, a place where reservations took 3 months, and appetizers cost more than most people's car payments. Tyrell sat in the private dining room on the 2nd floor, the kind of room where walls were thick and conversation stayed private. Across from him sat Marcus Chen, his second in command, a man Tyrell had known for 15 years, since they were both hungry kids in West Baltimore, running corners for an OG who got shot dead before either of them turned 20. The shipment's confirmed, Marcus said, cutting into a steak that cost $200. Colombian connection came through. 50 kilos, pure as you can get. We moved this. We're looking at $3 million profit. Easy. Tyrell sipped his wine, a Bordeaux that the sommelier had recommended. He didn't care much about wine, but appearances mattered. In his world, every detail sent a message who's handling distribution. Same crew as always. Detroit, Chicago, Philly. We got the routes locked down. Cops are paid off. Everything's smooth. Everything's smooth. Tyrell had heard those words 1,000 times, and 99 times out of 100, they were true. But it was that one time, that single moment when everything wasn't smooth, that could bring an empire crashing down. What about the feds? Tyrell asked. Marcus hesitated, just for a second, but Tyrell caught it. He caught everything. What about them? Marcus asked, trying to sound casual. You tell me. They've been quiet. No raids, no surveillance we know about. We're clean. Tyrell set down his wine glass, his eyes locking on Marcus. You sure about that? Yeah, man, I'm sure. Why you asking? Because Tyrell's instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive and out of prison for 20 years, was screaming at him. Something was wrong. He could feel it the way animals feel earthquakes before they happen. Just making sure we're being careful, Tyrell said finally. Marcus smiled, relaxed. Always careful. That's how we got this far. 2 weeks later, the feds kicked in the door of Tyrell's warehouse in Newark at 4 in the morning. They found everything. The drugs, the money, the guns. And they found the ledgers. The ones that connected Tyrell to every major drug operation from Miami to Boston. The rest was on every news channel. Major drug kingpin captured. They showed footage of Tyrell in handcuffs. B walked to a federal building while cameras flashed. The U.S. attorney held a press conference, bragging about bringing down one of the most dangerous criminals in American history. Tyrell's lawyers, the expensive ones who wore suits nicer than his, told him he was looking at life. The evidence was overwhelming. Someone had cooperated. Someone on the inside. Someone Tyrell trusted. He'd asked Marcus to visit him in county jail. Before the trial, Marcus came, looking nervous, which was the first real tell. They sat across from each other in the visitation room, separated by plexiglass, talking through phones that the guards definitely monitored. Who flipped? Tyrell asked, his voice low, controlled. I don't know, man. I'm trying to find out. You're trying to find out? Tyrell's voice didn't rise, but the threat was clear. You're my number 2, Marcus. If someone flipped, you should know. I'm doing everything I can, I swear. Tyrell hung up the phone, without another word. He'd seen everything he needed to see in Marcus's eyes. The guilt, the fear, the knowledge of betrayal. Marcus Chen had sold him out. Present DAY Irongate Penitentiary sound of the cell door opening brought Tyrell back to the present. A massive figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the harsh hallway lights. 6'5", easily 250 pounds of muscle, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left eye down to his jaw. "You must be the new guy," the man said, his voice surprisingly soft for someone his size. "Name's Darius." Tyrell stood, extending his hand. Tyrell. Darius's grip was firm, but not aggressive. A test. Tyrell realized. Everything in prison was a test. "Yeah, I know who you are," Darius said, sitting on the top bunk with a grunt. "Everybody knows. Tyrell Washington, the man who ran half the East Coast. Now you're in here with the rest of us poor bastards. Looks that way." Darius pulled off his work boots, the kind with steel toes that prison issued for the factory detail. "Word of advice, since you're new, keep your head down. Don't get involved in the politics. There's 3 main groups in here. The Aryan Brotherhood runs the north side of the yard. The Latin Kings got the south, and the Black Guerrilla family got everything in between. You're gonna get approached by all of them. They're gonna want you to pick a side. And if I don't," Darius laughed, but there was no humor in it, "then you become everybody's problem. And problems get solved permanent in here." Tyrell sat back down on his bunk, processing the information. The social structure of prison wasn't that different from the streets. Territory, allegiances, power. The faces changed, but the game stayed the same. "What did you do?" Darius asked. "On the outside, I mean, business, yeah, I bet. The kind of business that gets you 25 years in federal." Darius lay back on his bunk, hands behind his head. "Me, I killed a man, caught him with my sister, beat him to death with a tire iron, got 30 years. Been here 8 already, 22 more years." Tyrell couldn't imagine it. Or maybe he could. That's what was waiting for him to. 25 years of this 8x10 cell. Of eating food that barely qualified as edible. Of fighting every day just to maintain basic human dignity, unless he changed the game. "Tell me about the guards," Tyrell said. Darius lifted his head, interested now. "What about them? Who's dirty? Who can be bought?" A slow smile spread across Darius's scarred face. "Now that's an interesting question for a man who just got here. Most guys spend their first week just trying not to get shanked in the shower. I'm not most guys." "No," Darius agreed. "I don't suppose you are." He sat up, leaning over the edge of his bunk to look down at Tyrell. "Morrison, the one who brought you in. He's clean. Military Boy Scout type. Won't take money. Won't look the other way. He's the exception. Most of the others, they're all dirty in some way. The question is whether they're dirty for cigarettes and porn magazines or dirty for real money. Names, Thompson and D-Block. He'll smuggle in phones for $2,000 a pop. Carter in the kitchen. He'll look the other way if you're brewing hooch. And Rodriguez." Darius's voice dropped lower. "Rodriguez is the real one. He's connected to the cartels on the outside. He can get anything in here. Drugs, weapons, information. What he costs." Tyrell filed the information away. "Rodriguez, that was the key. If you wanted to change the game, you needed pieces on the board. And Rodriguez sounded like the kind of piece that could move mountains. Why you telling me this?" Tyrell asked. Darius shrugged. "Because I've been watching you since you walked in. The way you carry yourself. The way the other inmates looked at you. You're not here to serve your time and go home. You're here to do something. And when that something happens, I want to be on the right side of it." Smart man, Tyrell thought. "What makes you think something's gonna happen?" "Because men like you don't just accept cages. You break them." The evening count happened at 4 o'clock, like clockwork. Every inmate had to be visible in their cell while guards walked the tiers, checking off names on clipboards. Tyrell stood at the bars, watching the procession of orange jumpsuits, watching faces, reading body language. A short Hispanic man, maybe 40, with gray at his temples and tattoos covering every inch of visible skin, caught Tyrell's eye and nodded. One of the Latin Kings, probably, testing to see if Tyrell would acknowledge him. Tyrell nodded back. Not submission, just acknowledgement. "I see you. 2 cells down." A white guy with a swastika tattooed on his neck stared at Tyrell with open hostility. Aryan Brotherhood. They wouldn't like having a black man, especially one with Tyrell's reputation, in their territory. Too bad for them. After count, they were released for dinner. The cafeteria was exactly what Tyrell expected. Long metal tables bolted to the floor. Food that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated humanity. The noise was overwhelming. Hundreds of conversations happening at once, all of them coded. Prison had its own language, its own customs. Tyrell grabbed a tray, something that claimed to be meatloaf, instant mashed potatoes, green beans that had been boiled into submission, and a cup of what might have been coffee a week ago. He scanned the room for a place to sit. This was the moment. Where you sat determined who you aligned with. Who you sat with determined how you'd spend your time here. Washington. A voice called out from the left side of the cafeteria. Over here, brother. A table of black men, all of them built, all of them watching Tyrell with expectation. The Black Guerrilla Family, the most powerful black organization in the federal prison system. They ran drugs, protection, pretty much everything illegal that happened behind these walls. The man who called out was in his mid-40s, with a perfectly groomed beard and eyes that had seen things no human should see. His name was Jerome J.T. Thompson, and Tyrell recognized him from the streets. J.T. had been a legend in Detroit 20 years ago. Before he caught a life sentence for murdering a federal prosecutor, Tyrell walked over. But he didn't sit. J.T., Tyrell said, acknowledging the man. Tyrell Washington. In the flesh, J.T. smiled, revealing a gold tooth. Heard you were coming. Been waiting to talk to you. About what? About where you stand. You're a smart man, so I won't insult your intelligence. You know how this works. You're black. You're in Fed time. You're one of us. BGF takes care of our own. Protection, access to real food, phones, whatever you need. All we ask is loyalty. It was a good pitch, professional, the kind of pitch you make to a CEO, not a prisoner. But Tyrell had been on the other side of pitches like this for 20 years. He knew what loyalty meant. It meant following orders. It meant giving up autonomy. It meant trading one boss for another. I appreciate the offer, Tyrell said carefully, but I'm gonna need some time to think about it. The smile disappeared from JT's face. Around the table, the other men tensed. In prison, you didn't tell a man like JT that you needed to think about anything. You said yes, sir, and did what you were told. Time, JT repeated, the word coming out cold. You think you got time in here? I think I got all the time in the world, Tyrell said, his voice calm, his eyes locked on JT's. And I use it how I want. For a moment, the entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. This was how wars started in prison. Over disrespect, over someone not knowing their place, over a man like Tyrell refusing to bow to a man like JT. Then JT laughed. It was unexpected, and it broke the tension like a hammer through glass. You got balls, Washington. I'll give you that. All right, you take your time, but don't take too long. Protection's only guaranteed if you're with us. And there's a lot of people in here who'd love to make a name for themselves. By taking down the great Tyrell Washington, Tyrell walked away, finding an empty spot at a table near the back. He ate his dinner slowly, tasting nothing, his mind working through the pieces on the board. JT was right. He needed protection, but he didn't need it from the BGF. He needed something else, something bigger. He needed an army dot, and to get an army, you needed to give people something they couldn't get anywhere else. You needed to give them hope. The first 72 hours in prison taught you everything you needed to know about survival. Tyrell learned that the showers were the most dangerous place in the facility, that guards walked past cells at predictable intervals, that the vending machines in the visitation room were never stocked on Mondays, and most importantly, that every single person behind these walls wanted something. The trick was figuring out what they wanted before they figured out what you had. On his fourth morning, Tyrell was approached in the yard. The yard was a concrete rectangle surrounded by 30-foot walls topped with razor wire and gun towers. 200 men were crammed into a space designed for half that, all of them pretending to exercise while actually conducting business. The man who approached was the one with the swastika tattoo Tyrell had noticed during count. Up close, he was bigger than he looked from the cell. 6'3", maybe 240, with arms like tree trunks and the kind of prison muscles you only got from having nothing to do but lift weights for years. You're in the wrong part of the yard, boy, the man said, his voice dripping with practiced menace. Tyrell continued his push-ups, counting silently. 47, 48, 49. I'm talking to you. And Tyrell was on his feet before the word fully left the man's mouth. His movement was so fast, so unexpected, that the Aryan took half a step back. Just half a step, But in prison, that half step meant everything. It meant fear. It meant weakness. You're gonna want to finish that sentence very carefully, Tyrell said, his voice low enough that only the two of them could hear. Because the next words out of your mouth determine whether you walk away from this conversation or get carried away. The yard had gone quiet. Not completely. That would have attracted the guards' attention. But quiet enough. The kind of quiet that happened when everyone was watching without appearing to watch. The Aryan's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. Tyrell could see the calculation happening behind those pale blue eyes. Could he take Tyrell? Maybe, probably, if it came to a straight fight. The man had 50 pounds and 3 inches on him, but prison fights were never straight. They were chaos, and chaos favored the man who had nothing left to lose. Pike, a voice called out. Another white man, older, with silver hair and a face like weathered leather. He walked over with the casual authority of someone who'd been in charge so long. He didn't need to prove it. Back off. Now, Pike hesitated for just a second, then stepped back. The older man extended his hand to Tyrell. Name's Reinhardt. I run the Brotherhood in C Block. Apologize for my associate here. He's young, still learning manners. Tyrell didn't take the hand. Your associate needs to learn faster. Reinhardt withdrew his hand without offense, a slight smile on his face. You're right. He does. He turned to Pike. Go run laps. 20 of them. And think about impulse control. Pike looked like he wanted to argue, but one glance at Reinhardt's face killed that impulse. He walked away, his humiliation visible in every rigid line of his body. Walk with me, Reinhardt said to Tyrell. They walked along the perimeter of the yard, far enough from other inmates that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. The guards watched from the tower, but they were lazy about it, more interested in their phones than what was happening below. You made quite an impression your first week, Reinhardt said. Turn down JT. That takes either courage or stupidity. Which one do you think it is? If you were stupid, you'd be dead already. So I'm going with courage. Reinhardt stopped, turning to face Tyrell fully. I'm going to be straight with you, Washington. You're a problem. Not for me specifically, but for the whole system we got in here. You see, prison works because everyone knows their place. The Brotherhood controls white inmates. The Kings control the Hispanics. BGF controls the blacks. We all stay in our lanes. We all make money. And the guards let us run our operations as long as we keep the peace. And I'm disrupting that peace. Not yet. But you will. A man like you doesn't just accept the status quo. You want to build something. And whatever you build is gonna upset the balance. Reinhardt started walking again. So here's my question. What do you want? Tyrell watched a basketball game happening in the center of the yard. Young guys, mostly, throwing elbows and trash talk, playing like it mattered. Like they weren't all serving decades in a concrete box. I want out, Tyrell said simply. Reinhardt laughed. Don't we all? But that's not realistic for either of us. You got 25 years. I got life. So what do you really want? Protection, respect, a piece of the action? I want, Tyrell said slowly, to make sure that the man who put me in here pays for what he did. That got Reinhardt's attention. Revenge. Now that's something I can understand. He pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a match he'd smuggled from somewhere. Who's the target? Marcus Chen, my former second. He's the one who flipped. And where's Mr. Chen now? Free. Witness protection, probably. Living under a new name somewhere while I rot in here. Reinhardt took a long drag on his cigarette. Witness protection's tough to crack. Federal marshals don't play games. But he paused, thinking, it's not impossible. You need serious resources on the outside. Money, connections, the kind of network that can find ghosts. I have the money, Tyrell said, and I'm building the connections. And here, everywhere. Reinhardt studied Tyrell for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'm going to give you something for free because I respect what you're trying to do. There's a guard. Rodriguez, you probably heard about him already. He can get messages out, real ones, not the monitored phone calls or the censored mail. You want to reach your people on the outside. Rodriguez is your guy. What's his price? Depends on what you're asking for. A message? $5,000. A package coming in? 10 to 50, depending on size and risk. But here's the thing you need to know about Rodriguez. Reinhardt lowered his voice. He works for the Sinaloa cartel. Everything he brings in, every message he carries, the cartel knows about it. So if you use him, you're not just paying Rodriguez. You're owing the cartel. Tyrell filed that information away. The cartel. That could be an asset or a liability, depending on how he played it. Why are you helping me? Tyrell asked. Because I've been in here 17 years, and I'm tired of the same old game. You're going to shake things up. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's bad. But at least it'll be interesting. Reinhardt dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his boot. And who knows? Maybe we can help each other when the time comes. They parted ways without another word. Tyrell went back to his push-ups, but his mind was already 3 moves ahead. Rodriguez was the key to reaching the outside. And if Rodriguez worked for the cartel, that meant Tyrell needed leverage. Something the cartel wanted badly enough that they'd be willing to facilitate his plans. The question was, what could a man in prison possibly offer to one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world? That night, Tyrell lay on his bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling, listening to Darius snore above him. The cell was hot. The ventilation in Irongate was a joke, and summer in whatever state this prison was located in was brutal. Sweat ran down Tyrell's temples, soaking into the thin pillow that provided no comfort. His mind drifted to Marcus, to the betrayal. It still didn't make sense. Marcus had been with him from the beginning. They'd built the empire together, split the profits, shared the risks. Why would Marcus throw it all away to work with the feds? Unless there was something Tyrell didn't know. Some piece of information he'd missed. In his old life, Tyrell had prided himself on knowing everything. Every shipment, every transaction, every person in his organization. But no man knew everything. There were always secrets, and secrets got people killed. You awake? Darius's voice came from the top bunk. Yeah. Can't sleep either, huh? This heat's a bitch. The bunk creaked as Darius shifted his weight. You met Reinhardt today. Word travels fast. In here, word travels at light speed. Everybody saw you to talking. The Brotherhood guys think Reinhardt's recruiting you. The BGF thinks you're making alliances to go against them. And the Kings are just watching, waiting to see which way the wind blows. What do you think? Darius was quiet for a moment. I think you're playing a game that's bigger than any of these gangs understand. They're thinking about prison politics. You're thinking about something else entirely. Smart man. And what am I thinking about? Freedom. One way or another. Darius paused. I also think you're gonna need someone you can trust. Really trust. Not these gang leaders who'll turn on you the second it benefits them. Someone who's got nothing to gain by betraying you. And you're volunteering. I'm saying I've been in here 8 years. I got 22 more. My sister's the only family I got left, and she stopped visiting 3 years ago. I got no gang affiliations, no debts, no angles. What you see is what you get. And what I see in you is a man who might actually change things in this place. Tyrell considered this. Trust was a luxury in prison. Everyone had an angle. Everyone was looking to survive, and survival often meant betrayal. But Darius had a point. He had nothing to gain, no connections to leverage, no territory to protect. Sometimes the best ally was the one who had nothing left to lose. All right, Tyrell said, you're in, but understand this. What I'm planning, it's gonna get dangerous. People are gonna get hurt, and there's a good chance we don't make it out the other side. Brother, Darius said with a dark laugh, I'm serving 30 years in a maximum security prison. Dangerous is my normal. And as for making it out, I stopped believing in it the day they closed the cell door on me. So whatever you're planning, I'm all in. 1 week later, Tyrell's opportunity came during work detail. He'd been assigned to the prison library, which was actually a good job by Irongate standards. Air-conditioned, quiet, and full of books that nobody read. The librarian was a civilian employee. A nervous woman in her 50s named Mrs. Patterson, who clearly wished she worked anywhere else. But more importantly, the library was where Rodriguez did his rounds. Tyrell was shelving books in the law section when Rodriguez walked in. The guard was in his mid-30s, Hispanic, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from knowing you were untouchable. He wore his uniform like a costume, something he put on for show but didn't really respect. Their eyes met. Rodriguez nodded slightly, then walked toward the back of the library, where the reference section was located. An invitation. Tyrell waited 3 minutes, then followed. Rodriguez was leaning against a bookshelf, flipping through a dictionary like he was actually interested in definitions. When Tyrell approached, he didn't look up. Tyrell Washington, Rodriguez said quietly, I wondered when you come find me. I need to send a message. Outside, Messages are expensive. $5,000. Cash. I can do 5,000. Good, but understand, I don't take checks or promises. The money needs to be deposited in an account I'll give you. Once it's there, I'll carry your message. 1 page, handwritten, no codes, no encrypted shit that'll get me jammed up if someone intercepts it. Agreed. When tomorrow night, during night shift, I'll come to your cell around the AM. Have the message ready. Rodriguez finally looked up from the dictionary, his eyes hard. And Washington? Don't fuck with me. I do this for a lot of people, but I don't tolerate disrespect or games. You try to run on me, I'll make sure you end up in solitary for a month. We clear? Clear. Rodriguez walked away without another word. Tyrell stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what he'd just set in motion. A message to the outside, to his people, to the network he built over 20 years. The empire still existed. It was just waiting for orders from its king. That night, Tyrell wrote the message on a piece of paper he'd torn from a legal pad in the library. The writing had to be careful, specific enough that his people would know what to do, but vague enough that if it got intercepted, it couldn't be used as evidence. The package I discussed is ready for delivery. Contact our mutual friend in Baltimore. Time to collect on old debts. Numbers are the same. Move carefully. Simple, clean. D was Dante, his cousin, the only person Tyrell trusted implicitly on the outside. Package meant Marcus Chen, mutual friend in Baltimore, was a hacker Tyrell had used for years. Someone who could crack databases and find people who didn't want to be found. Old debts meant calling in favors from people who owed Tyrell their lives or livelihoods. At 2:17 a.m., Rodriguez appeared at Tyrell's cell. The guard moved silently, a ghost in the darkness. He unlocked the cell door, slipped inside, and held out his hand. Tyrell gave him the folded message. The account number? Tyrell whispered. Rodriguez handed him a tiny piece of paper, smaller than a business card. A routing number and account number written in meticulous handwriting. Money by Friday. Rodriguez said, or the message gets burned. It'll be there. Rodriguez left as silently as he'd arrived. Tyrell lay back down on his bunk, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Step 1 was complete. The message would reach Dante. Dante would mobilize the resources, and slowly, piece by piece, Tyrell would find Marcus Chen. But that was the long game. The revenge plan that would take months, maybe years, for the short game, for survival in Irongate. Tyrell needed something else. He needed power. The weeks later tension in C Block had been building like a thunderstorm. You could feel in your bones. JT had tried 3 more times to recruit Tyrell into the BGF, each time getting more aggressive. The Latin Kings had sent emissaries, offering protection in exchange for a percentage of whatever money Tyrell had on his books. Even the Aryan Brotherhood, through Reinhardt, had suggested a mutually beneficial arrangement. Tyrell had turned them all down, and that, every single person in Irongate knew, was going to cause an explosion. It came during lunch on a Tuesday. Tyrell was sitting at his usual spot, eating something that claimed to be chicken but tasted like cardboard soaked in grease. When Pike approached, the big Aryan had 4 guys with him, all of them looking like they'd been recruited from the same meathead factory. You think you're special, don't you? Pike said, loud enough that half the cafeteria could hear. Think you can just ignore the rules, disrespect the Brotherhood, walk around like you own this place. Tyrell set down his fork slowly. I think you should walk away while you still can. Or what? You gonna fight all 5 of us? No. Tyrell stood up, his voice calm, his eyes scanning the cafeteria. But they are. From 3 different directions, inmates stood up. Darius from one side, moving with surprising speed for a man his size. The BGF members from another side, including the guy Tyrell had been talking to in the yard about philosophy and strategy. And from a 3rd direction, surprisingly, the Latin Kings. Pike's confidence evaporated like water on hot concrete. He'd expected Tyrell to be alone, vulnerable. Instead, he was staring at a coalition that didn't make any sense. The BGF and Latin Kings working together, protecting someone who refused to join either gang. What the hell was happening? You got something to say to me? Tyrell asked, his voice still calm. Say it, but understand that whatever happens next, you started it. The cafeteria was completely silent now. Even the guards had stopped their conversations, hands moving to their radios. But they didn't call it in yet. They wanted to see how this played out. Pike looked at his backup, then at the men surrounding Tyrell, then back at Tyrell. The math wasn't in his favor. Not even close. This ain't over, Pike said, trying to save face. Yes, Tyrell said. It is. Pike and his crew walked away. The tension broke like a snapped rubber band. Conversations resumed. Guards relaxed. But everyone in that cafeteria had just witnessed something unprecedented. Tyrell Washington had built alliances across gang lines. He created loyalty where there should have been only competition and hatred. And that meant the balance of power in Irongate had just shifted. After lunch, back in his cell, Darius was almost giddy. You see their faces? Pike looked like he was gonna piss himself. That was beautiful. The absolute art. It was necessary, Tyrell corrected. But it's also gonna accelerate things. The gangs can't ignore this. Either they're gonna try harder to recruit me, or they're gonna try to eliminate me. We need to be ready for both. What's the plan? Tyrell sat on his bunk, thinking through the next moves. The truth was, he'd been planning this since his first day. Every conversation, every alliance, every carefully calibrated gesture of respect or defiance had been building toward one goal. Revolution, not escape. Not in the traditional sense. Escape was for men who wanted to run. Tyrell didn't want to run. He wanted to burn the whole system down and rebuild it in his image. The plan, Tyrell said slowly, is to take control of this prison. Not by joining one of the gangs, by making the gangs irrelevant. We're gonna offer inmates something none of these organizations can provide. What's that? Hope and money, and a future that doesn't involve dying in a cell. Tyrell looked at Darius. You know how many guys in here have skills, real skills. Computer hackers doing time for cybercrime, financial fraud experts, chemists who were manufacturing drugs, engineers, accountants. This place is full of talent that's being wasted, okay? So we organize them, create a network, use their skills to make money on the outside, then funnel that money back in here, share it, give every person who joins us a taste of what real organization looks like. Not gang bullshit where you're paying protection or following orders, but a real business. Darius stared at Tyrell like he'd grown a second head. You want to start a business? In prison? I want to start an empire again, but this time, it's not just about drugs or guns. It's about information, about connections, about building something that works whether I'm locked up or free. Tyrell leaned forward. And when we've got enough people, when we control enough of the internal economy, we're gonna use that power to change the conditions in here. Better food, better treatment, actual rehabilitation programs, or, he paused, we're gonna make this place burn. An uprising, Darius said quietly, a revolution. Tyrell corrected, and every revolution needs soldiers. Over the next 3 weeks, Tyrell moved through Irongate like a recruiter for a startup. He identified the talent. A kid named Miguel who'd done time for hacking into bank systems. An older white guy, Jensen, who'd been a chemical engineer before he got caught manufacturing meth. A black guy named Rashid who'd run a whole identity theft operation from his laptop. Before the feds caught him. To each one, Tyrell made the same pitch. You're wasting your skills in here, doing pointless work detail, making 60 cents an hour, going nowhere. I can give you real work, real money, and a piece of something bigger than any gang can offer. Some said no. They were too scared, to beaten down by the system, or too loyal to their existing gangs. But enough said yes. Enough believed in the possibility that Tyrell represented. Within a month, Tyrell had 40 men in his network. 40 men who answered to him, who believed in what he was building. And that network started generating results. Miguel hacked into various corporate databases from the prison computers in the library, gathering information that Tyrell's people on the outside could use for blackmail or fraud. Jensen used his chemistry knowledge to improve the quality of the prison hooch operation, making a product that actually tasted decent and commanded premium prices. Rashid coordinated a whole system of stolen credit cards and identity fraud that generated thousands of dollars a week, and Tyrell took 30% of every operation, not as a boss taxing his workers, but as a fund, a collective pot that got redistributed to everyone in the network. If a guy's family on the outside needed money, Tyrell covered it. If someone needed protection from gang violence, Tyrell's people provided it. If an inmate wanted to start his own side hustle, Tyrell funded it. It was socialism meets capitalism meets organized crime. And it was working. The gangs noticed, of course. JD pulled Tyrell aside in the yard one day, his face serious. You're making a lot of noise. Washington, people are leaving the BGF to join whatever you're calling this thing. That's disrespect. It's not about disrespect, Tyrell said. It's about opportunity. You offer protection. I offer prosperity. Different products. This place works because we keep order. You're disrupting that order. This place works, Tyrell said, his voice hardening. Because you've all convinced yourselves that the system can't be changed, that we're powerless, that the best we can do is carve out little kingdoms and fight over scraps. I'm offering something different. I'm offering actual power. JT studied Tyrell for a long moment. You're planning something big, something that's going to change everything, maybe. You think I'm going to just let that happen? I think, Tyrell said carefully, that you're smart enough to recognize when the tide is turning. You can fight it and drown, or you can swim with it and survive. That an offer? That's an observation. JT walked away without responding, but Tyrell could see the calculations happening. JT was a pragmatist. If Tyrell's network kept growing, if it kept offering better opportunities than the BGF, eventually JT would have to make a choice, join, fight, or become irrelevant. Tyrell was betting he'd choose to join, but not everyone was pragmatic. Some people were just violent. The attack came 3 days later. Tyrell was in the shower, one of the most vulnerable places in prison. The water was lukewarm, the soap barely produced a lather, and the whole room smelled like mildew and desperation. He heard them before he saw them, footsteps. 3, maybe for guys, moving with purpose. Tyrell turned just as the first one swung. A shank, made from a sharpened toothbrush handle. It would have gone into his kidney if Tyrell hadn't twisted at the last second. Instead, it sliced across his ribs, shallow but painful. The second attacker came from the left. Another shank. Tyrell grabbed the man's wrist, twisted hard, heard something snap. The guy screamed, dropped the weapon. But there were more. Always more. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The third attacker lunged. Tyrell slipped on the wet floor, went down hard. The attacker was on top of him immediately, the shank coming down toward Tyrell's throat. Then Darius appeared, out of nowhere, moving like a freight train. He grabbed the attacker by the throat, lifted him off Tyrell, and slammed him into the concrete wall so hard that Tyrell heard the man's skull crack. The fourth and fifth attackers hesitated. Darius didn't. He grabbed Tyrell's arm, hauled him to his feet. Run. They ran. Out of the showers, down the corridor, Tyrell naked and bleeding, Darius covering their retreat. Guards were yelling. Alarms were going off. The whole block was in chaos. They made it to their cell. Darius slammed the door shut behind them, breathing hard. You good? Tyrell looked down at his side. The cut was bleeding, but it wasn't deep. He'd gotten lucky. If that first strike had landed true, he'd be dead. I'm alive, Tyrell said, wrapping his ribs with a torn sheet. Who sent them? Pike. Had to be. That was an Aryan hit. Tyrell nodded slowly, the anger building in his chest like a fire. Pike had tried to kill him. The Brotherhood had made their move, and now Tyrell had to respond. Because in prison, if you let an attack go unanswered, you were dead. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. You had to send a message. You had to show strength. You had to show that crossing Tyrell Washington came with a price. Get the word out, Tyrell said, his voice cold. To everyone in our network, I want Pike. I want him isolated. I want him vulnerable. And then I want him gone. Gone. Darius asked. Gone. It took 2 days. 2 days of careful planning, of moving pieces into position, of creating the perfect opportunity. Pike had to go to medical for a chronic back issue. The route from C block to medical went through a corridor that had a blind spot in the camera coverage, just 15 seconds where you couldn't be seen. That's where Tyrell's people were waiting, 4 of them, including Miguel and Jensen. They moved fast, grabbed Pike, dragged him into a supply closet. What happened in that closet took less than 3 minutes. When Pike walked out, he was alive, but barely, beaten so badly that he'd need reconstructive surgery. A message carved into his chest with a shank. Respect. The Brotherhood responded with outrage. Reinhardt demanded a meeting. It happened in the chapel, neutral territory, with representatives from all the gangs present. You've started a war, Reinhardt said, his voice shaking with controlled fury. You attacked one of mine. That requires blood payment. He attacked me first, Tyrell said calmly. I defended myself. That's not war. That's survival. By having 4 men ambush him, that's not defense. That's retaliation, correct. And it's a lesson. Anyone who comes for me gets the same treatment. I don't care what gang they're with. I don't care how protected they think they are. You come for me, I come for you harder. The room was silent. JT was there, watching with interest. The Latin King's representative, a guy named Carlos, was smiling slightly. They all understood what Tyrell was really saying. The old rules didn't apply anymore. Gang protection meant nothing. Territory meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was individual strength and collective organization. And Tyrell had more of both than anyone else in Irongate. This is gonna escalate, Reinhardt said. You know that, right? The Brotherhood can't let this stand. Then don't let it stand, Tyrell said, leaning forward. Join me, your whole organization. Stop wasting time fighting over scraps and join something bigger. We're building a network that's gonna change this place. That's gonna change the whole federal prison system. You can be part of that, where you can fight it and lose. You think you can take on the Brotherhood? I know I can, but I'd rather have you as allies. Reinhardt stared at Tyrell for a long moment, then stood up. I need to think about this. Don't think too long, Tyrell said, because the offer expires, and when it does, the Brotherhood becomes irrelevant. The meeting ended. As inmates filed out of the chapel, JT grabbed Tyrell's arm. You got balls, Washington. I'll give you that. JT's voice was low, meant only for Tyrell. But you're playing a dangerous game. You're making enemies faster than you can handle them. I'm making examples, Tyrell corrected. There's a difference, maybe, or maybe you're just accelerating the inevitable. You know what happens when things get this unstable in a prison? Tell me, someone dies, usually a lot of someones, and the guards come down hard. Lockdowns, transfers, solitary. They break up any organization that threatens their control. JT released Tyrell's arm. So whatever you're building, you better build it fast, because the clock's ticking. JT walked away, leaving Tyrell alone in the chapel. The man was right. Things were moving fast. Too fast, maybe. But Tyrell had learned a long time ago that momentum was everything. Once you started a revolution, you couldn't stop halfway. You either won completely or lost everything. There was no middle ground. The message from Dante arrived 3 weeks after the Pike incident. Rodriguez slipped it to Tyrell during a routine cell inspection. A tiny piece of paper folded so small it could fit under a fingernail. Tyrell waited until lights out to read it by the dim glow of the emergency lights in the corridor. Found the package. Baltimore. New name. Michael Stevens. Works at a tech company. Married. 2 kids. Suburban life. Waiting for green light. Tyrell read the message 3 times, then ate the paper. Literally chewed it up and swallowed it. The way inmates had been destroying evidence for decades. The bitter taste of ink and paper was nothing compared to the bitter taste of betrayal. That had been sitting in his mouth for 6 months. Marcus Chen, now Michael Stevens, living a comfortable life in Baltimore with a new identity, a family, protection from the federal government. While Tyrell rotted in a cell not for much longer. Good news? Darius asked from the top bunk. The man had learned to read Tyrell's silences, to understand when something significant was happening. The best. Tyrell said quietly, everything's about to change. How soon? Soon. But Tyrell knew that revenge, while satisfying, was only part of the equation. The real prize was what he'd been building inside Irongate, a network that now numbered 73 men, 73 inmates who believed in something bigger than gangs or survival, who believed in actual change. And change required a catalyst, something explosive. Something that would force the administration's hand and prove to every inmate in the federal system that the old rules were dead. In Uprising. 1 week later, warden of Irongate was a man named Richard Moss, 62 years old, ex-military, the kind of administrator who ran prisons like they were still boot camps. He believed in discipline, punishment, and the fundamental principle that inmates were animals that needed to be caged and controlled. Tyrell had never met Warden Moss. Inmates at his level never did. The warden existed as a distant authority figure, someone whose policies filtered down through associate wardens and captains and guards until they reached the cell. Blocks as arbitrary rules that made life harder, for no apparent reason, but Tyrell was about to change that. The plan had taken weeks to develop. It required coordination across multiple cell blocks, timing that had to be perfect, and a willingness to accept that some people were going to get hurt, maybe killed. Revolution wasn't clean. It was blood and chaos and hope mixed together until you couldn't tell where one ended and another began. It started with the food. Jensen, the chemist, had been working on something special. Not poison, nothing that would actually kill anyone, but a compound that, when mixed into the prison's food supply, would cause severe gastrointestinal distress, vomiting, diarrhea, cramps so painful you couldn't stand within 2 hours of lunch being served. 300 inmates were sick. The infirmary was overwhelmed. Guards were panicking. The whole prison ground to a halt as men doubled over in pain, as toilets overflowed, as the administration realized they had a crisis on their hands. That's when Tyrell's people made their move. In the chaos, when guards were distracted, when protocols were breaking down, Tyrell's network struck. They'd been stockpiling weapons for weeks. Shanks made from sharpened metal, clubs fashioned from table legs, even a few contraband items Rodriguez had smuggled in for the right price. They took control of C Block first, overpowered the guards, locked them in cells, seized the control room, then D Block, then E Block. Within 90 minutes, Tyrell's people controlled half the prison. The alarm finally went off at 3:47 p.m., a wailing siren that meant lockdown. That meant emergency protocols. That meant the warden was about to call in the state police, the National Guard, anyone who could help retake the facility. But Tyrell had planned for that. Don Miguel, the hacker, had been working on the prison's computer system for months, slowly, carefully, creating backdoors and vulnerabilities. When the alarm sounded, Miguel activated his program. Every electronic lock in the prison opened simultaneously. Every camera went dark. Every communication system went offline. Irongate Federal Penitentiary, one of the most secure facilities in the country, was suddenly blind and helpless. And Tyrell Washington was in control. The guards who'd been captured were terrified. Tyrell could see it in their eyes as they sat in cells that usually held inmates, their hands zip-tied, their radios confiscated. They expected violence, expected to be beaten or killed or used as hostages in some desperate negotiation. Instead, Tyrell had them fed, had someone bring them water, made sure they understood they weren't going to be harmed as long as they cooperated. "You're not our enemies," Tyrell told them, standing outside the cell where 5 guards sat huddled together. "You're just people doing a job, a shitty job in a broken system. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to fix the system by starting a riot." One of the guards, Morrison, the ex-military one who brought Tyrell to his cell on his first day, his voice was shaky but defiant. "This is how you fix things. When peaceful change is impossible," Tyrell said, "violent change becomes inevitable. You think we wanted this? You think anyone here wanted to risk their lives, add years to their sentences, just to make a point?" He shook his head. "We tried the peaceful way, filing complaints, following procedures, asking for basic human dignity. And what did we get? Nothing. So yeah, this is how we fix things." Morrison didn't respond, but Tyrell could see the doubt in the man's eyes, the recognition that maybe, just maybe, Tyrell had a point. Tyrell left the guards and made his way to the control room. It was packed with his people. Darius was there, coordinating movements between blocks. Miguel was at the computer terminal, making sure that control of the system stayed absolute. Rashid was on a smuggled cell phone, communicating with media contacts on the outside. Because this wasn't just about controlling the prison. This was about controlling the narrative. "Status?" Tyrell asked. "We hold C, D, and E blocks completely," Darius reported. "A and B blocks are mixed. Some inmates joined us. Some are staying neutral. Some are fighting back. The gang leaders are trying to maintain their own control. JT, he's sitting tight, watching, waiting to see which way this goes." Tyrell had expected that. JT was pragmatic to the core. He wouldn't commit until he knew who was going to win. Reinhardt, the Brotherhood split. Reinhardt is calling for negotiations, but some of his guys, including what's left of Pike's crew, they want blood. They're fortifying a block, talking about taking us out. Tyrell walked to the window overlooking the yard. From here, he could see inmates moving freely. Some were celebrating, finally experiencing what freedom felt like after years of being caged. Others were scared, hiding in their cells, waiting for the inevitable violent response from authorities. "How long before they breach?" Tyrell asked Miguel. The hacker looked up from his computer. "I've shut down their electronic access, but they can override manually. It'll take them maybe 6 hours to get the tools in place and cut through the security doors. Less if they bring in specialized equipment. 6 hours. That was the window. 6 hours to accomplish everything Tyrell had been planning. "Give me a line to the outside," Tyrell said to Rashid. "Not the warden, not the police. Give me CNN. Give me every news outlet in the country. I want cameras here. I want the world watching what happens next. On it, Rashid said, already dialing. Tyrell turned to Darius. Go to JT. Tell him it's time to choose. He joins us now, or he becomes irrelevant. Same message to Reinhardt. This isn't about gangs anymore. This is about all of us versus the system that's been crushing us. Darius nodded and left. Tyrell stood alone in the control room for a moment, feeling the weight of what he'd started. Hundreds of men were following him, trusting him, believing that he could actually change things. He couldn't fail them. His phone, the one Rashid had given him, buzzed. A text message from Dante. Package ready for delivery. Say the word. Tyrell looked at the message for a long moment. Marcus Chen, the man who betrayed him, who destroyed his empire and put him in this cage. One word, and Marcus would be dead. Revenge, finally, after 6 months of waiting. But something stopped him. Some instinct that had kept Tyrell alive for 20 years in a business where most people didn't make it to 30. Killing Marcus now would be satisfying, but it would also make Tyrell just another criminal seeking revenge. It would undermine everything he was trying to build here, the narrative he was creating. Instead, Tyrell typed a different message. Hold. Wait for my signal. Different play. He had a better idea. An idea that would serve revenge and revolution at the same time. 2 hours later, the media arrived faster than Tyrell expected. News vans parked outside the prison walls. Helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing aerial footage of the facility. Every major network was broadcasting live. Prison uprising at Irongate Federal Penitentiary, inmates seize control. Standoff develops as authorities plan response. Tyrell stood in the warden's office, which his people had secured an hour earlier. The office was exactly what you'd expect. Mahogany desk, American flag, citations and awards on the walls. Photos of Warden Moss shaking hands with politicians and law enforcement officials. The man's whole identity wrapped up in controlling others. Tyrell sat in the warden's chair and made the call. That would change everything. Not to the warden, not to negotiators, to a reporter named Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist known for exposing corruption. Miss Chen, my name is Tyrell Washington. I'm currently leading what your colleagues are calling a prison uprising at Irongate Federal Penitentiary. I'd like to give you an exclusive interview. Are you interested? The silence on the other end lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then, I'm listening. Good. Here's what I'm offering. Complete access. You come inside. You talk to inmates. You see the conditions we're living in. You document everything. In exchange, you broadcast our demands to the world. Unedited, unfiltered. Do we have a deal? How do I know you won't take me hostage? You don't. But ask yourself, Miss Chen, what do I have to gain by harming a reporter? My goal isn't violence. It's exposure. The system has been abusing us for decades, and nobody cared because nobody knew. Now you have a chance to show them. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, I'll need guarantees. Safe passage in and out. Access to guards to verify they're not being harmed. And editorial control over the story. Done. All of it. Be at the East Gate in 20 minutes. Tyrell hung up and smiled. This was how you won in the modern world. Not with guns or violence, but with narrative. With showing people the truth in a way they couldn't ignore. The system could crush an uprising, but it couldn't crush an idea. Especially not when that idea was being broadcast live to millions of people. Sarah Chen arrived exactly on time. Tyrell met her at the gate personally, along with Darius and 4 other men. She was in her 40s, professional, with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. A cameraman and a sound guy followed her, their equipment at the ready. Mr. Washington, she said, extending her hand. Tyrell shook it. Thank you for coming. I know this is unusual. That's an understatement. She looked around at the prison, at the inmates moving freely, at the guards locked in cells. You're aware this is going to end badly for you, right? The authorities won't let this stand. Maybe, but that's not the point. The point is what happens before it ends. What story gets told? What changes get made? Tyrell gestured toward C Block. Come on, let me show you why we're doing this. For the next hour, Sarah Chen and her crew documented everything. The overcrowded cells where men slept on floors because there weren't enough bunks. The medical ward that was understaffed and undersupplied, where inmates with serious conditions waited months for treatment. The cafeteria that served food barely fit for human consumption. the isolation cells where men were kept in 23-hour lockdown for infractions as minor as talking back to a guard, and the inmates told their stories. Men who'd been beaten by guards, men who'd been denied medical care for cancer and diabetes and heart conditions, men who'd been in prison for decades under mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug crimes. The camera captured all of it. Then Sarah Chan interviewed Tyrell. They sat in the yard, surrounded by inmates. The interview broadcast live to every news network in the country. Mr. Washington, you're currently serving 25 years for drug trafficking and racketeering. Some people would say you're a criminal who deserves to be here. What would you say to them? Tyrell looked directly into the camera. I'd say they're right. I am a criminal. I broke the law. I hurt people. I deserve to be punished, but I don't deserve to be treated like an animal. None of us do. This place isn't about rehabilitation. It's about revenge. It's about making us suffer. And when you create a system that dehumanizes people, that takes away all hope, that treats human beings like they're disposable, you create violence. You create desperation. You create exactly the kind of situation we're in right now. What are your demands? Real rehabilitation programs, access to education, proper medical care, an end to mandatory minimum sentences that destroy families and communities, an independent review board to investigate guard misconduct, and most importantly, we demand to be treated like human beings with dignity and rights, even if we're incarcerated. And if those demands aren't met, Tyrell leaned forward, then this is just the beginning. There are over 2 million people in prison in America, most of them in conditions just like this, most of them with no voice, no hope, no future. We're not asking for freedom we didn't earn. We're asking for justice. And if this system won't give it to us, then this system needs to change. The interview went on for 20 more minutes. Sarah Chan was thorough, asking hard questions, pushing back on Tyrell's narrative. But Tyrell answered everything calmly, articulately, making his case not just to the reporter, but to the millions of people watching. By the time the interview ended, social media was exploding. Hashtag Irongate Uprising was trending worldwide. Activists were organizing protests outside prisons across the country. Politicians were being forced to comment on conditions in the federal prison system. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't just a riot anymore. It was a movement. For hours after the uprising began, Moss finally made contact. A phone call to the control room passed through the prison's emergency communication system that Miguel had deliberately left functional. This is Warden Richard Moss. I'm speaking to whoever's in charge of this situation. Tyrell picked up the phone. This is Tyrell Washington. I'm in charge, Mr. Washington. The warden's voice was strained, trying to maintain authority in a situation where he had none. What you're doing is adding decades to your sentence. Federal charges, possible death penalty if anyone gets killed. And this now, release the guards, and I'll do what I can to minimize the consequences. That's a generous offer, Warden, but I'm not interested. Then what are you interested in? I already told the world. Better conditions, real reform, basic human dignity. But since you're on the phone, let me add one more demand, specific to Irongate. What's that? You resign, today, effective immediately, because you've been running this place like a torture facility for 15 years, and that ends now. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, you're insane if you think, Tyrell interrupted, that in about 30 minutes, the U.S. Attorney General is going to call you, and she's going to tell you that the entire country is watching this situation. That pressure is mounting, that politicians are demanding reform, and that you become a liability. So yeah, Warden, I think you're done. Tyrell hung up before Moss could respond. Dr. Reyes, who'd been listening, shook his head with admiration. You really think they'll fire him? They'll make him resign, give him a pension and a quiet exit. But yeah, he's done. Public pressure's too high. They need a sacrifice, and he's it. And what about us? That was the question. What happened to Tyrell and everyone who participated in the uprising? The charges would be severe, the consequences brutal, unless Tyrell had one more card to play. He pulled out the phone and called Dante. It's time, Tyrell said. Execute the package, but not how we discussed. I need it public. I need proof, and I need it to tie back to the people who put me here. What are you thinking? Dante asked. Marcus didn't flip because he wanted to. Someone pressured him. Someone in the federal system who had leverage. Find out who. Find out what they threatened him with, and bring that information to Sarah Chan. Let her break the story. That's gonna take time. You have 2 hours. Make it happen. Tyrell hung up and turned to face his inner circle. Darius, Miguel, Rashid, Jensen, the men who believed in him from the start. We're in the endgame now, Tyrell said. The authorities are going to breach within the next few hours. When they do, we don't fight. We surrender peacefully. We make it clear this was never about violence. It was about being heard. They're gonna crucify us, Rashid said quietly. Add years to everyone's sentence. Maybe charge some of us with terrorism. Maybe, Tyrell agreed. But here's what they won't be able to do. They won't be able to undo what we've started. This story, these demands, this movement, it's out there now. Millions of people saw the interview, saw the conditions, saw that we're human beings, not animals. Change is coming, whether we're here to see it or not. That's supposed to make us feel better about dying in prison? Miguel asked. No, Tyrell said honestly, but it should make you feel better about fighting in the first place. We could have done our time quietly, kept our heads down, served our sentences, and died forgotten in cells. Instead, we fought. We stood up. We said this system is wrong, and we're not going to accept it anymore. That matters. That changes things. The room was quiet. Then Darius stood up, walked over to Tyrell, and extended his hand. It's been an honor, brother. Tyrell shook his hand. The honor's been mine. One by one, the others came forward, shaking hands, acknowledging what they'd done together, knowing that whatever came next, they'd made their mark on history. 6 hours after the uprising began, breach came at 10:23 p.m. Federal tactical teams, heavily armed and wearing riot gear, cut through the security doors and flooded into the prison. They expected resistance, expected violence, expected a bloody battle. Instead, they found Tyrell, his core group sitting in the yard, hands visible, completely peaceful. We're surrendering, Tyrell announced as tactical officers surrounded them, assault rifles pointed at their chests. No resistance. We want this to end without anyone getting hurt. The confusion on the officers' faces was almost comical. They'd been briefed for a combat situation. Instead, they were getting a peaceful surrender. The rest happened quickly. Tyrell, Darius, and the others were separated, zip-tied, loaded into transport vehicles. As Tyrell was being led away, he saw Sarah Chan still filming, her camera capturing every moment. Their eyes met. She nodded slightly, a professional acknowledgement. She'd tell their story. That's all Tyrell could ask for. The holding cells were in a different facility. Maximum security beyond even Irongate. Tyrell was placed in isolation. 23 hours a day in an 8x6 concrete box with a steel door and no windows. But he wasn't alone, because 2 days after his arrest, a guard slipped him a newspaper. The headline made Tyrell smile for the first time in months. Federal prosecutor forced to resign amid corruption scandal. The article detailed how Assistant U.S. Attorney David Morrison had coerced a witness named Marcus Chen to falsify testimony against Tyrell Washington in exchange for witness protection. Morrison had been building cases against multiple defendants, using threats and intimidation to secure convictions. An investigation led by journalist Sarah Chan had uncovered emails, recordings, and documents proving the corruption. Marcus Chen's testimony was now in question, which meant Tyrell's conviction was in question, which meant appeals, retrials, possible exoneration. The package had been delivered, not with a bullet, but with the truth. And the truth was more powerful than revenge could ever be. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Media, activists, legal observers, and family members of inmates all crammed into the federal courthouse to witness what had become one of the most high-profile cases in the country. Tyrell sat at the defense table, wearing a suit his lawyers had brought. Not the orange jumpsuit of a prisoner, not the chains of a convicted felon, a suit, because his status had changed. The uprising at Irongate had sparked a national conversation. Congressional hearings on prison conditions, Department of Justice investigations into multiple federal facilities. Warden Moss had resigned, as Tyrell predicted. 3 guards had been arrested for abuse, and most importantly, reforms were being implemented. Real reforms, but Tyrell's personal case was still unresolved. The corruption of David Morrison had tainted the original trial, but the evidence against Tyrell wasn't entirely fabricated. He'd still run a criminal empire, still trafficked drugs, still broken the law. The question was what happened now. The judge, a woman named Elizabeth Reeves, looked down at Tyrell with an expression that was hard to read. Mr. Washington, I've reviewed your case extensively. The original conviction was based partially on testimony we now know was coerced. However, there's still substantial evidence of your criminal activities. Tyrell stood. I understand, Your Honor. The prosecution has offered a deal. Time served, 5 years supervised release, and full cooperation in ongoing investigations into prison conditions. Time served. Tyrell had been locked up for 8 months. 8 months that felt like 8 years. And now he'd walk out, free, with conditions, but free. However, Judge Reeves continued. I want to say something on the record. Mr. Washington, what you did at Irongate was illegal. You endangered lives. You caused chaos. By all rights, I should be sentencing you to additional decades in prison. Yes, Your Honor. But I'm also aware of what you exposed. The conditions in that facility were unconscionable. The systematic abuse, the denial of basic human rights, the complete failure of rehabilitation. Your actions, while illegal, sparked reforms that should have happened decades ago. You forced this country to look at a system we've been ignoring. The judge paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I don't condone what you did, but I understand why you did it, and I believe that you've already paid a price for your crimes. Therefore, I'm accepting the prosecution's deal. Time served, 5 years supervised release. You're free to go, Mr. Washington. The courtroom erupted. Cheers from activists, gasps from observers. Tyrell stood there, barely processing what had just happened. Free. After everything. After the betrayal, the imprisonment, the uprising, the isolation. He was free. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Simmons, who'd taken his case pro bono because she believed in prison reform, grabbed his hand. Congratulations, you did it. Tyrell walked out of the courthouse into sunlight that felt foreign after months in artificial light. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but Tyrell ignored them all because standing at the bottom of the steps, waiting for him, was Dante, his cousin, the one person who'd never doubted him. They embraced. No words needed, just the acknowledgement that they'd survived. What now? Dante asked. Tyrell looked back at the courthouse, then at the crowd of activists and former inmates who'd gathered to support him, people who believed in what he'd started. Now, Tyrell said, we keep fighting. But legally this time, we start a foundation. We lobby for reform. We help people who are still trapped in the system. We make sure that what happened at Irongate wasn't just a moment. We make it a movement. And Marcus? Tyrell thought about that. About the man who betrayed him, who destroyed his life. Marcus was in witness protection, but his credibility was destroyed. His testimony worthless. He'd spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if revenge was coming. That was punishment enough. Marcus is the past, Tyrell said. I'm focused on the future. They walked away from the courthouse together. Free men. Not innocent. Not without scars, but free. And that freedom, burned through suffering and sacrifice, was worth more than any empire Tyrell had ever built, because he'd learned something in Irongate, something that changed him fundamentally. Power wasn't about control. It wasn't about wealth or territory or fear. Real power was about inspiring people to believe in something bigger than themselves, about creating change that outlasted your own life. And Tyrell Washington, former drug kingpin, former inmate, former revolutionary, was just getting started. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Washington Foundation for Prison Reform operated out of a modest office in downtown Philadelphia. The staff was small but dedicated. Former inmates, activists, lawyers, and social workers all committed to the mission, transforming the American criminal justice system. Tyrell sat in his office, reviewing proposals for programs that would provide education and job training to incarcerated individuals. His supervised release was going well. He'd stayed clean, attended all his meetings with his probation officer, and dedicated every waking hour to the foundation. A knock on the door. Patricia Simmons, his former lawyer and now the foundation's legal director, poked her head in. You have a visitor, she said. Who? Says his name is Darius. Tyrell stood up immediately. Darius, his cellmate, the man who'd stood by him during the uprising. He hadn't seen Darius since they'd been separated after their arrests. Hadn't known what happened to him. Darius walked in, and Tyrell almost didn't recognize him. The big man had lost weight. His head was still shaved, but the prison hardness was gone from his face. He looked hopeful, Brother, Tyrell said, embracing him. What happened? I thought they were going to throw the book at you. They did, Darius said, sitting down. Added 5 years to my sentence. But then something happened. Your foundation filed an appeal based on the prison conditions, argued that the uprising was a justified response to human rights violations. The judge didn't buy it completely, but she reduced the additional sentence to time served. And with good behavior and the new reform programs, I got out 3 months ago. And you're staying clean? Clean as a whistle. Got a job in construction. Got my own apartment. First time in 9 years I've slept in a bed that wasn't a prison bunk. Darius smiled. I'm here because I want to help. Whatever you're doing here, I want to be part of it. Tyrell felt something in his chest. Pride, maybe, or hope. We can always use good people, especially people who understand what it's like inside. Then I'm your man. They talked for hours. About the foundation's work. About the reforms that were slowly, painfully being implemented across the federal prison system. About the inmates still trapped in facilities like Irongate, waiting for change that might never come. But change was coming. Slowly, but surely, because Tyrell and people like him were making sure of it. As the sun set over Philadelphia, Tyrell looked out his office window at the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus Chin was living under a new identity, haunted by what he'd done. Somewhere out there, thousands of inmates were locked in cells, dreaming of freedom. Somewhere out there, the system that had crushed so many lives continued to grind on. But it was changing, one policy at a time. One reformed facility at a time, one freed inmate at a time, and Tyrell Washington, against all odds, had been the spark that lit the fire. He'd gone into prison a criminal. He'd come out a revolutionary, and his revolution had just begun.